Hello.
Good morning. Really excited. Actually, I know Kieran wanted to look for some ideas in terms of where this morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, I spoke to my kid online, and she said, "Daddy, I want to go to see Taylor Swift on Friday. Can you book tickets?" So I have to go there, kind of open my tablet, log in, put in the credit card, which seats you're gonna pick and all that stuff. I would have loved to have a conversational AI interact with my daughter to do that thing. Well, the reality is that we are seriously at an inflection point here, right? So, do you remember the days where you had to press F1 in order to open the menu and kind of F3 to confirm and control X and Y in order? This is as a change in the way that technology is evolving and our lives are going to evolve that we haven't seen for quite a while. And it's not only me saying it, but I was having a conversation with the former minister, deputy minister for digital innovation and research for Cyprus just last week, and he said this is as transformative as much as the light bulb was, right? Maybe a bit less, but it is going to change our lives. And we have to wake up, right? We cannot ignore it. We have to really understand how this is going to be impacting the work environment. And there's a lot of opportunity out there, right? So organizations are looking at the adoption of AI from the perspective of gaining efficiency, driving new experiences, and really, it's a shift in terms of what the workforce experience is going to look like.
Michael, I'm really interested from your experience, because you've been with, I've heard 17 plus years, but you've been with UI for the last 6 years, driving projects in technology consulting in Malta, which I'm guessing the weather is very nice.
Yeah, and a few other countries.
Good. So tell me from your experience, because you talk every day with customers, what do you feel changed in the business scene?
There's a constant awareness that the organization needs to change in order to do work in a different way, right? We've seen the emergence of RPA technology for the automation of tasks, and organizations are facing substantial amount of churn in terms of human resources. People don't want to do boring jobs anymore.
It's very hard to find people that want to do the job that you need them to do.
Exactly, and most importantly, they need to be able to feel that they're actually being empowered to do the stuff which they're trained for and they're creative about and think about. You can't believe how long it takes in order for me to open up an opportunity on our CRM system. Yes, we have automation running that. I want to have a conversation with someone.
Michael, we'll talk after.
Yeah, we'll talk
I'll tell you.
That. Yeah, Thierry, next use case, POC. So the work experience needs to evolve. And actually, if you look at even the studies that the World Economic Forum has been doing, the workforce environment is going to evolve substantially, and we have to actually shift and get ready for organizations in order to be able to absorb and integrate this technology in order to actually make that transition, right? So it's not for the sake of the technology itself.
It's actually for the sake of the people more, and technology actually helps. And it was very interesting because you mentioned about new experience. Yeah, you talked a bit about how it was in the past. We talk now about new experience. How do you see it? What is this new experience? And if you see some challenges in, this road to automation.
I have a slide for that.
Yes, perfect. Bring it up.
Well, the reality is that, we didn't prepare for this, right? So the reality is that, CEOs are actually seeing that, listen, this is something that I need to look at. Most probably, I think Forrester did a study, it's 22% of organizations really have large-scale implementations of AI in the organization, right? Some are laggards, some are not really looking at it. I don't know where they
Where they're going.
where they are. But anyway, like, the fact is that CEOs are seeing that, technology leaders, business leaders are seeing this quite transformational. Like the advantages that, for example, Microsoft have, shared with the, how, generative AI is actually changing, and increasing the productivity of coders is quite remarkable. My son is starting, he has just started university. He's doing a course in AI. And actually, I called him and I told him, listen, all that study you did for programming, a few commands and the code came up. I told him, like, this is going to replace your job in the future. So it was a little bit discouraging, but had to push him a little bit further. But there's also another reality, which is, 46% have concerns, right? Yeah. 46% are concerned about, how do I trust the technology? How do I actually build confidence within the organization? Can my employees feel that, this technology is something that they can rely on, right?
Absolutely, and I think the trust is very important in this whole process.
And a study I did in terms of the future of the workforce, you see in this chart, by different industry segments, and how people feel confident about this technology in terms of being applied in that particular segment. In terms of that, you see one thing, right? The much more data-centric organizations like telecoms, financial services, they're very much used to the technology being embedded in their work processes. Absolutely. And they're more comfortable in terms of
they're more open, because we've seen, Gabi and Andrea earlier. Exactly. Seeing how open they are to actually adopt this.
But there are other industries where, and other verticals where obviously there's a bit of skepticism in terms of, am I liable? I had a very long conversation with Kieran in terms of, AI in the context of healthcare, where, can a doctor rely on the technology to advise him, at which point in time does the concern about liability and trust come to the point where a professional, a lawyer, or maybe a consultant, actually, rely on the information that he's getting. And there are ways of going about it, right? And this is what we're going to talk about in the latter part of the discussion, in terms of how you actually build the foundations in the organization to embed this technology, but also actually build trust around it.
And it's very interesting, because I know, looking at that chart, I see that the least prone, let's say, industry that would adopt AI and technology is the defense. It's very interesting, because we at Druid are working with US Air Force as a customer, implementing an HR solution. So you can actually look at things a bit differently as well.
And this is one important distinction to make, really important distinction. There's the vertical dimension and there's the horizontal dimension. Yes. There's work practices in any organization which are pretty much, with all due respect, a commodity, right? So it's much, let's call it, it's much more natural in order to actually take those components, which are, if it's about dealing with customers, it's about dealing with finance data, why do I have to actually answer to my boss and tell him, like, why is the revenue not going up this month? What's this gonna, like, go and inquire, to the chatbot that will actually analyze the data, utilize generative AI behind the scenes, and actually give you that information in front of you, right? So there are things which are horizontal, and then there's very domain-specific technologies and practices. And what's changing in the market is that with the investment that is being done on the foundational models and the technology being productized into platform and capabilities, the adoption in the vertical space is not more of an experimentation, but an adoption.
Plus, I think it's really interesting, because here we're looking from the employee perspective, but we also have this interaction with the customer that needs to take into account. Maybe those industries that are not necessarily prone from an employee perspective can actually look at it from something.
And the diagram here, like, that little brain thingy there, it's realizing that this is not a matter of automating a task. This is about augmenting the capabilities of the workforce, right? And it's an augmentation scenario. It's an assistant. It's something that helps you to do your job faster and better. But there are things that organizations need to take into account, particularly in terms of making sure, like any digitalization initiative, there's threats, risks in terms of failure. There's an inherent aspect of change happening right within the organization.
Basically, it's a process. I
It's a
think
process.
in all journeys, I think it's a process. And I would actually want to do an experiment here with you because you're the expert here. You've worked with customers. So I would actually want to play the role of a customer in this room. I'm very interested in AI. I'm very interested in this conversational AI space. I don't know exactly where to start. So help me. Where should I start?
And this is, so the first thing, I start with the disclaimer first. Don't think about it as one particular technology to solve one specific problem, right? This is, in order to become successful in the adoption in this space, you have to have the right foundations across the organization. And this is where my background in enterprise architecture comes into play, right? So the typical framework of enterprise architecture, where we're linking the business capability to the strategy, we're looking at the applications in order to support that, the technology to enable it, and more important at the core is the data, right? With security spanning across the board. The same mindset needs to be adopted when we are actually looking at the adoption of these technologies. First of all, there's a two-pronged approach, right? Top-down and bottom-up. If you do only bottom-up in isolation, bottom-up helps in terms of, as we've heard, understanding the technology, understanding the potential, looking at the capability and how it and really understand how it's going to change the organization. But there also needs leadership direction in terms of top-down by looking at holistically how conversational AI, generative AI, and other AI technologies are actually going to impact the business by linking them to not on a task level, but looking at them holistically at a process, at the value chain perspective, because it's going to impact the customers and the employees. And this is where we look at that top layer. At the heart of it is data, right? Most organizations are still struggling with siloed, fragmented, unstructured, undocumented, unclassified, undescribed data. And we're working with a lot of organizations really of actually establishing those foundations. It doesn't mean you have to wait, because that's a very long journey, right? We're coming from decades of dealing with single applications, right? You deploy an ERP system, you deploy an HR system, you deploy a supply chain system. The world is changing by looking at processes holistically, by looking at that interaction, that now will be conversational. You don't want it to be siloed across one single application, and it needs to be across the board. And these things can actually happen in parallel, whilst at the bottom, we see building the set of technologies and components, the arsenal that the organization is going to have to be able to absorb this capability inside of the organization. We've seen that with low-code systems, right, over the past years. Low-code systems are becoming one alternative component of how you actually deliver capability within the organization. And that needs to be integrated as a platform mindset across
Because I think what you pinpoint correctly regarding data, I think there's two ways of doing it. If you're waiting for putting an order within the data in your company, then you've already missed the train of automation. I think, and I would love to hear your opinion. How do you see a conversational platform as being an omni-channel to all the technologies that we know our customers have and that are a bit fragmented, if you want?
The integration of conversational AI with the combination of automation technologies, like, in fact, within EY, we don't call it, and even outside, we don't call it artificial intelligence, or we don't call it automation, we call it intelligent automation. Because we're seeing these three tiers of maturity or capability growth within organizations, right? At the point where you're going to have the conversational aspect integrating with the automation capability, the process design, and then surfacing the data, right? So data management practices are very important. The automation practice is extremely important, and this conversational element is actually bringing it and surfacing it in an experience which was different from, spend 3 weeks and trying, I'm fed up of our SAP training. We just migrated to SAP and in Malta. So I'm fed up of that. So why can't I have a conversation with my SAP?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have a question because you, at the beginning, talked about trust and trust in the technologies and trust in this whole process of automation. So I have a quite a difficult question for you, and I would love to hear your answer. Can conversational AI and generative AI particularly and trust can live under the same roof?
What does trust mean and how we actually achieve that? So it's a matter of building confidence, and how do you actually do that, right? So you need to have trust in the quality of the outcome that you're receiving, right? When we're talking about the risks around hallucination, the lack of oversight in terms of the data, if you have crappy data, I don't expect miracles, right? So let's be realistic here. So the performance and accuracy of the solution is one element that builds trust over time. Right? You don't expect people to trust it
from day one.
From day one.
Yeah.
As much as you still have organizations that, yes, they have an ERP, but they still print out their invoices and have them filed and actually put in an archive somewhere, right? So we have to see these jumps that are happening at such a rapid pace. The other element is transparency. So the transparency around how that outcome is actually being done, what's actually driving this. Similar to when we're looking at data and analytics, having people understanding this is the lineage of the data. It's the same concepts that need to happen in terms of having explainability of why, and we're seeing these even in the consumer facing space, right? If I'm actually surfacing an answer, these were the sources that I've used for that. Right? Bing is a perfect example with the latest release of the conversational aspect of Bing. Bing does that really, really well. And we need to actually think about that from a design experience point of view for the organization. Ultimately, it's also about the accountability and the ability to actually challenge, right? Having the structure within the organization in order to know, listen, these are the parts which are being driven by which parts of the technology, and that's where the enterprise architecture will come into play. Data privacy and security, of course, we can spend like a whole day just talking about that. But most importantly, and I was happy it was really mentioned in the previous session, it's the human oversight, right? It's making that distinction of where you're going to have a situation where, yes, the AI is going to drive the outcome, and when do you actually want to have the person in the front seat making that decision. Yes, I'm going to share this with the customer, right? It was in the demo as well. Yes, I feel comfortable with this answer. And being able to actually utilize that human oversight in order to actually reinforce the capabilities of the platform and the quality over time. And that's a substantial shift which we're seeing, where you have, yes, the machine learning part, but also the reinforcement learning part coming into play, right?
So tell us what's next.
What's next? My key message is not to think about individual projects, but think about, already from now, about the strategic capability of the organization. And actually, I utilize the slide in context as well of any form of digital transformation in the organization. The first part is you need to have people with cross-functional knowledge within the organization. The technologists, the business specialists, the process architects working together. Many times I see projects fail because that communication is broken. That's where digitalization fails. You need to actually bring these people together. There are various ways and forms, but there are multiple perspectives. The UX designers, the process architects, the business specialists. The second pillar is really think about that platform of capability. It is, you're building you're putting in place the building blocks that allow you to then orchestrate that new experience and that new process or new product or new service.
Yeah, that omni-channel approach that we keep talking about.
And ultimately is having the right balance between experimentation and learning, or proof of concepts, which is a mechanism of learning, with the right governance structure in place. In order to be able to actually give directions at an early stage, in terms of what are the foundational changes that need to happen, right? Right now, I'm working with an organization in financial services where and we're talking about technology of 5 years ago, 4 years ago. They're implementing low-code platforms in the organization, right? And they've experimented with this, in isolation, with various teams, which is good, right? That bottom-up approach. But now they realize in order to actually scale this up, you need to establish the best practices. You need to establish a center of excellence capability where you're pooling the knowledge of the organization together in order to accelerate that adoption. And these are the mechanisms that need to be driven top-down in the organization in line with the strategic goals.
I think it's just a journey. I think everything is a journey, and I think it's important from where you start, but also where you want to achieve. So, Michael, thank you very much for this. I hope that people in the room were inspired to start an automation journey. If we have any questions.
If you want to connect.
Yeah.
And by the way, have a look at ey.ai. Not that I'm pitching anything, it's just interesting. I'm not. It's just interesting, how organizations are really surfacing these capabilities in internal platforms as well, right? We were doing that internally for us, but it's also a good example of having those practices and the technologies in place for the whole organization. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.